Good evening. Tonight we're going on a little trip. Not to a sunny beach or a charming European capital, but to some of the darkest, most terrifying corners of modern history. We're talking about politics. Now I know what you're thinking, John. All politicians are a bit dodgy, aren't they? It's a prerequisite, like owning a slightly too tight suit and having the ability to look directly into a camera and lie about your favorite type of cheese. And while that's often true, tonight we're moving beyond your garden variety corruption and into a whole different league of malevolence. We are counting down the 10 most notorious politicians whose legacies are not written in policy documents, but etched in blood, suffering, and sheer unadulterated evil. This isn't just a list of people who were bad at their jobs. This is a list of individuals who wielded immense power and used it to orchestrate human misery on a scale that is frankly difficult to comprehend. Their names have become bywords for tyranny, their faces symbols of oppression. The criteria for this grim countdown aren't just about personal cruelty, though there's plenty of that to go around. We're looking at the sheer scale of their impact, the global infamy they achieved, and the lasting scars they left on their nations and the world. It's a list based on a horrifyingly high score in the Olympics of awfulness. So brace yourselves, this is going to be a heavy one. We're about to stare into the abyss, to examine the careers of men who remade their countries into personal fiefdoms of fear. This is our countdown of the top 10 evil politicians in the world. It's not going to be fun, it's not going to be light, but it is absolutely necessary to remember what happens when power falls into the very worst of hands. Let's begin. If you have a stiff drink nearby, now would be a very good time to reach for it. Kicking off our list at number 10 is a man who held an entire nation in a chokehold for nearly 4 decades, Spain's Generalissimo, Franco. Now, Franco is what you might call a classic dictator. He wasn't particularly flashy, he didn't have a signature mustache that screamed, "I'm the villain." Oh wait, he absolutely did. After winning the brutal Spanish Civil War with a little help from his fascist pals in Germany and Italy, Franco established a regime that was all about control. His brand of authoritarianism was a cocktail of nationalism, militarism, and staunch Catholicism, which sounds like a terrible theme for a high school prom and was an even worse way to run a country. Under Franco, Spain became a political prison. Opposition was not tolerated, it was systematically crushed. He created a secret police force, the Dirección General de Seguridad, which was about as friendly as a rattlesnake in your sleeping bag. Political opponents, intellectuals, artists, and anyone suspected of red sympathies were rounded up, tortured, or simply disappeared. His white terror resulted in the deaths of tens of thousands after the war. For 36 years, he suppressed regional cultures, banned languages like Catalan and Basque, and enforced a rigid conservative social order. He was the human equivalent of a "no fun allowed" sign posted over an entire country. At number 9 we have Slobodan Milošević, a man whose name is synonymous with the violent disintegration of a nation. He wasn't a general who seized power in a coup. He was a banker and a Communist Party apparatchik who masterfully manipulated Serbian nationalism to claw his way to the top. Think of him as the evil, power-hungry version of a regional bank manager who, instead of just denying you a loan, decides to ethnically cleanse the entire neighborhood. His rise in the late 1980s was fueled by fiery speeches that stoked ancient ethnic hatreds, effectively pouring gasoline on the smoldering embers of the Balkans. When Yugoslavia began to fracture in the early 1990s, Milošević wasn't a peacemaker, he was the chief arsonist. He backed Serbian forces in Croatia and Bosnia, leading to years of horrific warfare. His policies directly led to sieges like the one in Sarajevo, and massacres like the one in Srebrenica, where over 8,000 Bosnian Muslim men and boys were systematically executed. This wasn't just war, it was ethnic cleansing, a deliberate campaign to create a greater Serbia by violently expelling or killing other ethnic groups. He was the first sitting head of state to be charged with war crimes, a fitting, if tragically late, postscript to a career built on division and death. Sliding into our number 8 spot is the Chilean dictator who put the pin in Pinochet because he'd pin you to a wall if you disagreed with him. General Augusto Pinochet. On September 11, 1973, a date with its own tragic resonance, Pinochet led a CIA-backed military coup that overthrew the democratically elected socialist government of Salvador Allende. What followed was 17 years of brutal, systematic repression. Pinochet's philosophy was simple: any and all opposition must be eradicated, immediately and without mercy. It was less a political strategy and more the approach of a man trying to kill a spider with a sledgehammer. His regime became infamous for its human rights atrocities. The National Stadium in Santiago was turned into a concentration camp. His secret police, the DINA, perfected the art of making people disappear. Thousands were executed, tens of thousands were tortured, and hundreds of thousands were forced into exile. His caravan of death was a military death squad that flew by helicopter from town to town, executing political prisoners. And while his supporters will point to his free market economic policies, the so-called miracle of Chile. It's a miracle that came at an unbearable human cost. It's like complimenting a serial killer on his excellent gardening skills. It rather misses the point. At number 7, we find the man who literally wrote the book on fascism, or at least had someone write it for him. Italy's Benito Mussolini, or Il Duce. With his jutting jaw, bombastic speeches, and a flair for theatricality, Mussolini was the original strongman showman. He was like a proto-reality TV star who, instead of fighting with his housemates, decided to abolish parliament and invade Ethiopia. He and his black-shirted thugs marched on Rome in 1922, effectively bullying the king into handing him power. And from there, he set about creating a totalitarian state where the individual meant nothing, and the state meant everything. Mussolini's rule was defined by aggressive nationalism, militarism, and the complete suppression of dissent. He dismantled democratic institutions, controlled the press, and used his secret police, the OVRA, to terrorize opponents. His dream was to restore the glory of the Roman Empire, which is a bit like your uncle trying to relive his high school football days by tackling the mailman. His ambitions led him into a disastrous alliance with our number 1 entry, plunging Italy into World War II, a conflict for which the country was woefully unprepared. His legacy is one of hubris, violence, and ultimately being hung upside down in a Milan piazza by his own people. A rather stark final review. Our number 6 spot goes to a man who ruled a country as his own personal, deeply weird and terrifying movie set, North Korea's Kim Jong-il. Inheriting power from his father, the great leader Kim Il-sung, the dear leader Kim Jong-il took an already isolated and oppressive state and somehow made it worse. He maintained power through a pervasive cult of personality that bordered on the divine. State propaganda claimed his birth was heralded by a double rainbow and a new star in the heavens, which is a level of ego that makes even the most narcissistic pop star look humble. He was, essentially, a god king in a tracksuit. But behind the bizarre mythology was a horrifying reality. Kim Jong-il presided over a system of vast prison camps, where hundreds of thousands faced starvation, torture, and forced labor for perceived political crimes. He poured the country's meager resources into his military and a nuclear weapons program, while his people starved during a devastating famine in the 1990s, a period euphemistically called the Arduous March. His rule was a masterclass in totalitarian control, sealing his people off from the outside world and feeding them a constant diet of propaganda and fear. He was a reclusive, enigmatic figure who left a legacy of mass suffering and nuclear brinkmanship. Crashing into our top 5 is the man whose full self-given title was His Excellency, President for Life, Field Marshal Al-Haji, Dr. Idi Amin Dada, VC, DSO, MC, Lord of all the beasts of the earth and fishes of the seas and conqueror of the British Empire in Africa in general and Uganda in particular. Yes, really, Idi Amin. His 8-year reign in Uganda during the 1970s was a whirlwind of erratic brutality, economic collapse, and grotesque violence. He seized power in a military coup and quickly established himself as one of history's most unpredictable and sadistic tyrants. Amin's rule was a reign of pure terror. He created killer squads like the State Research Bureau and the Public Safety Unit, who were responsible for the abduction, torture, and murder of up to 300,000 Ugandans. He targeted ethnic groups, intellectuals, journalists, and anyone he perceived as a threat. He famously expelled the country's entire Asian population, giving them 90 days to leave, which crippled the economy overnight. His behavior was bizarre and chilling, from reportedly feeding his enemies to crocodiles to keeping the severed heads of his opponents in a freezer. He was a caricature of a dictator, but the horror he inflicted on his people was all too real. At number 4, we have a man who ruled Iraq with an iron fist and a truly magnificent mustache for over 2 decades, Saddam Hussein. He wasn't just a dictator, he was a gangster who happened to run a country. Saddam's Ba'athist regime was built on a foundation of paranoia, nepotism, and extreme violence. He trusted no one outside his family and his clan from Tikrit, and he maintained power by ensuring that everyone in Iraq was terrified, either of him, his secret police, or his notoriously sadistic sons, Uday and Kuse. His government was less a functioning administration and more a sprawling criminal enterprise. Saddam's list of atrocities is appallingly long. He launched a disastrous 8-year war with Iran that killed hundreds of thousands on both sides. He used chemical weapons, including mustard gas and sarin, against Iranian troops and, most infamously, against his own people. The 1988 Halabja chemical attack killed an estimated 5,000 Kurdish civilians, a monstrous act of state-sponsored terrorism against a minority population. After the First Gulf War, he brutally suppressed uprisings by the Shia in the south and the Kurds in the north, draining the southern marshes to destroy a unique culture and way of life. His palaces were monuments to gaudy excess, built on the suffering of his people. Entering the top 3 is a man whose ideology was so extreme, so divorced from reality, that it led to the death of a quarter of his own country's population in just 4 years. Pol Pot, the leader of the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia. When his forces captured the capital, Phnom Penh, in 1975, they didn't just want to change the government, they wanted to reset civilization itself. They declared Year Zero and began a radical, insane social experiment to create a purely agrarian communist utopia. This utopia, however, was built on a foundation of skulls and bones. The Khmer Rouge forcibly evacuated entire cities, marching millions of people into the countryside to work as slaves in collective farms. Money, private property, religion, and education were abolished. Anyone with an education, doctors, teachers, lawyers, anyone who wore glasses for God's sake, was deemed an enemy of the revolution and executed. The country was transformed into a giant concentration camp, the infamous killing fields. Starvation, disease, and constant executions led to the deaths of an estimated 1.7 to 2 million people. Pol Pot wasn't just a killer, he was an architect of self-genocide, a man who murdered his own nation in the pursuit of a twisted, impossible dream. Our runner-up for the grimmest prize in politics is a man whose nickname meant Man of Steel, and who ruled the Soviet Union with a will of iron and a heart of stone, Joseph Stalin. After outmaneuvering his rivals following Lenin's death, Stalin consolidated power and transformed the USSR into a totalitarian state that he controlled with absolute paranoid authority. He was the ultimate puppet master, playing his subordinates against each other, rewriting history on a whim, and airbrushing his purged enemies not just from power but from photographs, as if they never existed. His reach was total, his paranoia infinite. Stalin's reign was a catalogue of horrors on an industrial scale. His forced collectivization of agriculture led to a catastrophic famine in Ukraine, the Holodomor, which killed millions through starvation. His Great Purge of the 1930s saw millions of Communist Party officials, military leaders, and ordinary citizens arrested by the NKVD, the secret police, tortured into false confessions, and either shot in a basement or sent to the Gulag, a vast network of brutal forced labor camps. The death toll from his policies of purges, executions, famines, and forced labor is staggering, with estimates ranging from 20 to 30 million people. He was a monster who turned a revolutionary dream into a bureaucratic nightmare of terror and death. And at number 1, a name that needs no introduction and has become the very definition of human evil, Adolf Hitler. He is the final boss of terrible politicians, the gold standard of genocidal maniacs. A failed artist and bitter World War I corporal, Hitler harnessed post-war resentment, economic depression, and virulent anti-Semitism to rise to power in Germany. He was a charismatic demagogue who promised a broken nation a return to greatness, but the path to that greatness led directly into the darkest abyss of the 20th century. His Third Reich, which he boasted would last 1,000 years, lasted 12, but in that time it unleashed hell on earth. Hitler's evil was both systematic and fanatical. He didn't just want to conquer territory, he wanted to re-engineer humanity itself based on his twisted racial ideology. He plunged the world into the most destructive conflict in history, World War II, causing the deaths of over 60 million people. And at the heart of his war was the Holocaust, the state-sponsored industrial-scale extermination of 6 million Jews, along with millions of other minorities, political opponents, and disabled people. It was a genocide of unparalleled scale and chilling efficiency, executed in death camps like Auschwitz and Treblinka. Hitler represents the terrifying endpoint of unchecked power, nationalism, and hatred. He is, without question, the most evil politician the world has ever known. So, there you have it. A journey through a gallery of tyrants, a veritable who's who of human awfulness. It's easy to look at these figures as monsters, as aberrations of history that exist only in grainy black and white footage. But the most terrifying truth is that they were all human. They rose to power not through magic, but through political calculation, popular support, and the apathy of others. They exploited fear, nationalism, and economic anxiety, emotions that are as present today as they were in the 1930s. They are a stark, screaming reminder of what can happen when societies lose their way, when critical thinking is replaced by blind loyalty, and when democratic checks and balances are eroded. This isn't just a history lesson, it's a warning. The seeds of tyranny are perennial. They lie dormant in times of peace and prosperity, but they are always waiting for the right conditions to sprout. Learning about the horrors perpetrated by Hitler, Stalin, Pol Pot, and the others on this list is not about morbid fascination. It is our duty. It is our moral obligation to understand the mechanisms of their power, to recognize the warning signs, and to remember the catastrophic human cost of their ideologies. The ghosts of their victims demand that we do not forget, lest their fate be repeated. Therefore, the greatest defense against the rise of future tyrants is a vigilant and informed public. It's us. It's you. It means staying engaged, questioning authority, challenging hateful rhetoric, and defending the democratic principles that these men worked so hard to destroy. History is not just something that happened, it is a lesson that we must constantly study and apply, because the price of forgetting is a price that humanity simply cannot afford to pay again. Stay informed, stay vigilant. Thank you for watching.